I know I told you before that IPA contains all the symbols of all the sounds used in human language. That's not entirely true, especially considering things like Silbo, a language spoken, and I use that term loosely, on the island of La Gomera, which is off the northwest coast of Africa, as you can see. It is a mountainous, craggy volcanic island with wide distances between the sparse population. So if you were, say, on this protuberance right here, and your buddy was over on this protuberance right here, and you wanted to yell over something like, "Do you have any Fruit Loops? I'm out of Fruit Loops." Well, that's just not going to carry that distance. But whistling, it turns out, carries much further than the human voice. And so over millennia, the inhabitants of the island developed whistles. They're not just calls like birds might make, but they have meaning and complex structures that qualify them as a language, the world's only whistling language. I don't actually know if there's a whistle for Fruit Loops, but that's how they would communicate. As so many languages are, this language was on the verge of extinction. That's probably because there aren't many jobs to be gotten. The future is not written in the language of Silbo, and it was dying out on the verge of extinction, but local schools now require it. You can see the school children practicing, and there are even competitions. So, would you like to hear it? Check this out. Well, I'm not fluent, but I think I did catch the word for Fruit Loops in there somewhere. Oh, there it is again. Well, now that our vowels are locked down, I'm going to give you another character, the R-colored schwa. And if in doing your IPA transcriptions, you've wondered, what exactly is this sound? It's not quite this, not quite that. This may be what you are looking for. I bet a lot of those words that you had problems with involve a combination of a vowel and an R. It turns out the R is sort of the troublemaker of the phonetic world, so let's look at what it does to the vowels in these words, each of which has a vowel followed by an R. Standard, assert, mirth, work, turkey, measure, myrtle. Did you know that even though they have an A, E, I, O, U, and even Y, all of those ended up saying pretty much the same thing? And that sound is kind of an kind of like an angry schwa, right? What happens here is that the R exerts a kind of gravity on the vowel. Or you can think of it as anticipation. Your mind knows there's an R coming, and so your mouth starts to anticipate that R and move into R position, which you remember is sort of in the middle of the mouth. And that pulls the vowel out of its sort of natural, normal, front, back, high, low position toward the center of the mouth. And you get a kind of combination of the R and the vowel as one sound. And that sound has this symbol. It's a schwa with a little hook on it. They're kind of fun to make. You make your upside down E, and that's almost like a cursive R coming out of it. Remember that a diacritic is an added little mark that you put on an IPA symbol to give it a nuance of pronunciation. Well, this hook means an R-colored schwa. So pause the lecture at this point and see if you can write out IPA transcriptions of these words, each of which contains an R-colored schwa. Remember to use your ears, not your eyes, and to listen for whether the word has one or two syllables. So let's see how you did. Earth. That's one syllable. I know they're two written vowels, but do not trust your eyes. Pluck them out lest they offend you. Earth. The E, A, and the R are all subsumed together into an and then a th, the unvoiced interdental fricative, earth. Second, art. Well, I told you there was going to be an R-colored schwa in there, and there is, but that's not all there is. It's not ert, it's art. Two vowels together. We make the sound of two vowels. It actually forms a kind of diphthong between the initial ah, like father, and the the R-colored schwa before the T. Art, art. One syllable, but a diphthong. And something similar happens in our next sound, air. I'm using the pronunciation air. As in bet. And then there's another sound, which is the sound. Air. Now if we take that same set of sounds, air, and raise the first sound from to e, we get ear. Air, ear. Moving down to 5, we have fire. Starts with an F sound, and then we have the I diphthong. And finally, the R-colored schwa, fire. And finally we have dinner, which is good because I'm getting hungry. Di, first syllable, second syllable, ner, N, and the R-colored schwa. So if you're doing IPA transcription and you're having trouble deciding what that vowel sound is, look around for an R, the troublemaker. The R-colored schwa might just be your problem solver. We're moving on now to a new subject, phonemes and allophones. And knowing the difference between those two will enable you to use symbols to come even closer to how we actually speak. So what is a phoneme? Pretty much everything we've learned so far is a phoneme. It's a basic language sound. You can think of phonemes as mental dictionary entries, as the way a sound is represented or stored in your brain. So if you hear n or n, you say, well, it's an n sound. And you access the meaning of the word it's in based on, I just heard an N sound. And crucial to the nature of phonemes is they can distinguish otherwise very similar words. For instance, bat and pat, bit and pit are the same except for that one difference. And that one difference tells us that B and P are in fact phonemes in English. Those two words I just gave are what we call a minimal pair. A pair of words exactly similar except for one change. And if you notice in this case the change is very small between a B and a P. By now you know those as bilabial stops, the voiced and the unvoiced. Is just voicing that bilabial stop enough to change words? It is. It is in English. In other languages, it's not. They're both processed as slightly different versions of the same phoneme. We do that, for instance, with S and Z. Sometimes the plural S is pronounced as an S, like kicks, and sometimes it's pronounced as a Z, like toes. But you don't even think of that. The mind processes the Z and the S, which are just the voiced and unvoiced alveolar fricative, as the same sound, as an S. Not so for B and P. They're different phonemes. So we say that minimal pairs, like bit and pit, are the test for whether two sounds are phonemes or the other term we're learning, allophones. If a phoneme is the dictionary entry that resides up in your brain, you want to think of allophones as different performance variations that reside in your mouth. Allophones are slightly different ways of pronouncing a single phoneme. In other words, one phoneme can have many different allophones. Why would they differ if they're all stored in the brain as the same sound? This happens because sounds occur not in isolation, but next to other sounds. They occur in sound neighborhoods, in linguistic environments. So just like we saw before that R colors the vowel next to it, it creates an allophone out of that vowel. In the same way, nearly every sound exerts a kind of pull on the sounds around it. You can think of it as a kind of gravity, or you can think of it as an energy-saving mechanism whereby we anticipate a coming sound and start moving towards it before we actually get to it. And that affects the placement of the tongue and other parts of the mouth in preceding sounds. And allophones are indicated by diacritic marks. That doesn't mean we're being critical. They're no less than phonemes. It just means that they have an added symbol above or below, before or after, which says it's pronounced with this little nuance. Here are some of the diacritics available to us. Don't worry, we're not going to learn nearly all of those. We're going to focus on one phoneme and on several diacritics that get added to it. But before we get to that one phoneme and start to unpack it, let's think a little bit more about linguistic environment. As I said, all sounds are influenced by the sounds around them. Let's take another example. The example of N. We think of that as the alveolar nasal. Go ahead and form it N. Now, a little puzzle for you. Pause the lecture and say the words on the say line. And note your tongue position when you make the written N in each of them, and ask which ones, there are two, are different. I'll walk through them with you. We have new, never, ten, mountain, month, and tenth. Did you catch which two are different? Which two your tongue goes someplace else? It's month and tenth. I want you to form the word month, but I want you to do it slowly, and I want you to freeze frame on the N, and then I'll ask you where your tongue is, which is always a good thing to know about oneself, where one's tongue is. So I'll do it with you. Right there. Where's your tongue? It's in between your teeth, isn't it? Or if it's not in between your teeth, I bet it's touching your top tooth, maybe on the back. Why would that happen? It's because of what's coming. What's coming is a th sound. And if you remember, that is an interdental tongue between the teeth, and your brain, in learning to talk, knows that that sound is coming, and instead of making sound, stop, sound, stop, sound, stop, we flow and glide from one sound to the next. And so we're actually on our way to that th sound, even as we're making the N sound. And so the th pulls the alveolar N forward. You could say it dentalizes it. That sounds like something you do not want to happen at the dentist's office. And in linguistics, we call that anticipation. The symbol for that allophone of N is N with a little bracket underneath it. And the reason why it's an allophone is that it's a performance variation, but your brain still files it as an N. And these things don't happen haphazardly, word by word. These things follow rules, and linguists love to formulate rules. Here's the rule that applies to month. The phoneme N is pronounced as the allophone N. I just made a fronted N, a dental N, when it is followed by a dental sound. We are on our way in this lecture to hear about the 6 different allophones of T, but first we need one more tool in our toolkit. What, you say? Good question. Here's your consonant chart again. Do you notice what's different? I've added a bracket. See it up there in the top right? A glottal stop. Like the other stops, whatever goes in that bracket would stop the air and then release it like pa, ba, da, ga, ka. And the place you stop the air is down in your throat, very low down at your epiglottis. Now this is not a sound we can make sort of in isolation. You only make it when you begin a vowel sound. So I go from silence to ah or oh. And the reason that vowel can come out is because that glottal stop gets released. I let the air through to begin the vowel. The best way to locate the glottal stop is if you re-articulate a vowel sound, like ah, ah, ah. That catch in your throat that stops the sound, that is the glottal stop. It's also the sound in the middle of oh. Oh. There's a stop there that dams the air before you switch from to o. And the symbol for it is a question mark. And you'll need that question mark in the next section to describe what's going on as we make the 6 different allophones of T. Say the following words and notice just what your vocal apparatus is doing at the T point in each of them. And I've given you little suggestions for noticing the differences in parentheses. So you put your hand in front of your mouth and say table. Now say kit, and think about the airflow throughout the word kit. Now say ladder. I should point out there are 2 T's in that word. That makes absolutely no difference in the world of phonetics. Next is button. Say it again slowly, button. The question you might be asking is, where'd the T go? Who took the T? Next say truck, and finally say stink. For each of the 6 T's, I'll give you the symbol on top, the name we'll refer to it by, the feature of its production, the symbol again, the environment, because like with the R-colored schwa, it's conditioned by being in a certain neighborhood next to other sounds. And I'll give you several examples, and often there'll be a note down on the bottom. So first is the aspirated T with a superscripted H. And I give this to you first because it's what happens to a T when it comes first. Again, put your hand in front of your mouth and say table. Leaving your hand in front of your mouth, say stable. Do you feel the puff of air with table that is not there with stable? When the T is the first sound, it's second in stable in a word or a syllable like entire, it's accompanied by a puff of air. Did you know you were puffing out? You could see it if you had a candle in front of you. Whenever T starts a word or a syllable, it's aspirated. And the reason for the symbol is that there's a sort of, the H is a breath, right? Table. That's what happens when T begins a word or a syllable. Let's go to the opposite end and look at when T ends a word. There's our question mark that I told you we would use. The environment here is final whenever T ends a word. And it is something called pre-glottalized. And there's a superscripted question mark before the T for the symbol. Well, let's find this in our mouths. Pay attention to the airflow throughout the entire word as you say hit. Now compare hitter. In hitter, there's a constant stream of air leaving your lungs the entire time. Hitter. But that's not the case for hit. Say hit slowly. Is it hit? That's weird. There's actually a break in the air. Hit. There's a catch in the throat. Where? That's right, the epiglottis. Hit. For some reason, our brain knows that T is coming, and it slams on the brakes on the air right before it, and we stop the air, and then go ta. Hit. Kit. Cat. By the way, all unvoiced final stops are pre-glottalized in English. Coming up next, we have a new symbol. That is an upside down J. You can turn your head upside down and confirm that. That is an upside down capital J, and it has a name and it's called a flap. Some linguists call it a tap, but I prefer to call it a flap. Think about how you normally make a T sound. I told you, you touch the tip of your tongue to the alveolar ridge. Ta, ta. But that full contact sport does not happen in words like bitter. It will happen if you say it with too much emphasis and too much attention and too much self-conscious attention to your enunciation. Bitter. Yes, you can say that. But that's not the way we speak. We say, oh, this apple is bitter, bitter. And the tongue either brushes by the alveolar ridge, just sort of gently grazing it, or passes below it. Bitter, ladder, better. We don't say this is better than that. We say it's better. And again, you can compare. And again, you can compare words. Better and bit. The tongue does make contact in bit, but not quite in bitter. You can compare ladder and latte. And you can compare better and bet. So when the tongue just sort of flips by or flaps by the alveolar ridge without making full contact, that's a flap. This, by the way, happens to both D's and T's, as your note says on the bottom. So ladder and ladder are homophones. If someone says, do you want this 30-foot ladder or this 10-foot ladder? And you say, I'd like the ladder. They don't actually know what you said because latter and ladder are homophones in normal pronunciation. Remember the example where someone stole the T? Here's the explanation. A T can be fully replaced by a glottal stop, our new symbol, that catch in the throat, where there's no T. It's not pre-glottalized, it's just missing. When does that happen? That happens when the written T precedes a syllabic N. Well, what is a syllabic N? Remember when we talked about consonants and how when you go down the consonant chart, they become more vowel-like, they become more open, and nasals and approximants and even liquids can actually function as vowels in some words. So if you take the word button, there's really no O in it. But on, it's button, button. And that N is essentially the vowel in the second syllable of the word. It's syllabic, meaning it acts as the vowel at the heart of the syllable. So whenever you have a word where T precedes a syllabic N, the T goes away, and it's replaced by a catch in the back of your throat. Say the words button, kitten, bitten, cotton. And if you said kitten, you're trying too hard. Use it in a sentence. Oh, I'd love to pet the adorable kitten. Kitten. Do you recall which sound was our troublemaker? The one which pulled all of those vowels out of their rightful positions? The R? Well, the R also exerts an effect on T. Say the word truck. Because the R is further back in the mouth than the T, it also pulls the T back, just like it pulls front vowels back. So you end up getting something which is palatalized. Palatalized means it's moved from the alveolar ridge further back. That is, your tongue hits further back than it normally would on the alveolar ridge to the palate. Truck, truck. That, by the way, is the neighborhood where we say CH sound, cha. And that is the reason why so many young children naturally, when they're spelling phonetically, take their Tonka truck and spell it truck. The symbol for that is a T with a superscripted J. Now recall that J is a glide, an alveopalatal glide, yeah, and it's further back than the alveolar ridge. So adding that symbol to T gives you cha, truck, truck. The sixth and final allophone of T is, and I'm sorry for the letdown, just T. The unvoiced alveolar stop, made on the alveolar ridge, and under what conditions do you make the plain T? The answer, everywhere else. In every word when conditions 1 through 5 do not apply. And thus, the 6 allophones together do something that allophones must do to add up to a phoneme. They must cover every potential environment that sound can exist in. And so there's often one whose environment is and everywhere else. So this is the everywhere else one. So in steak and store, the T is not initial, not final. It doesn't come before a syllabic N. It doesn't have an R after it. It's just plain T. And so only in this case do you do what you learned earlier. Put your tongue on your alveolar ridge, damn the sound, and let it come out steak. Let's review. The words you said before were table. Feel the aspiration. I've given you the IPA on the right with the diacritic on the T, table. Kit, preglottalized, where you cut off the air before the end because it's final. That's kit. Ladder. There the T is replaced by the flap, the upside down J, ladder, because it's intervocalic, that is between two vowels, where the first vowel is stressed. Button. There the T is replaced by the glottal stop. It is again between two vowels, but with the extra condition that the last vowel is an N, which is syllabic. We have truck, with the sort of CHE sound, which is palatalized after the R. Truck. Notice the R is in there, it's upside down. And there, as in button, you have the wedge symbol for And finally, stink, with a proper T. And notice that there's no N. If you wrote the IPA symbols S-T-I-N-K, you would have stink. But that's not what we say. Notice that that N before a K is pulled into its own allophone. Instead of being an N, it's an ang, stink, like an ing. In other words, that's a glimpse of yet another allophone of N.